On August 9th, 1904, a short man chasing his runaway donkeys across the Nevada desert found chunks of gold so big he could see them glinting from arm's length away. 3 years later, that exact spot became home to 10,000 people living in one of the richest and most modern cities in America. Today, nobody lives there at all. This is the story of how a fortune was found, how a city rose from nothing, and why it all disappeared faster than anyone thought possible. Frank Harris stood only 5 feet 4 inches tall. That is how he got the nickname Shorty. He was born in Rhode Island in 1857. His parents died when he was just 7 years old. After that, he spent his entire adult life wandering the deserts of the American West looking for gold. Other prospectors called him a single-blanket jackass prospector. That was their term for the poorest kind of gold hunter, someone who traveled with just one blanket and a pack animal. Shorty did not have fancy equipment or a lot of money, but what he lacked in gear, he made up for with instinct. He had worked at famous gold camps like Leadville in Colorado and Tombstone in Arizona. He knew what gold looked like, and he knew where to find it. In the summer of 1904, Shorty was prospecting near Death Valley. He had 5 burros loaded with supplies. He stopped at a place called the Keene Wonder Mine to rest. There he met another prospector named Ernest Cross. Most people called him Ed. Cross was new to prospecting. He had a farm back in California. He was not nearly as experienced as Shorty, but he was out of supplies. He asked if he could tag along with Shorty. Shorty said yes. The two men headed into the hills together. On the morning of August 9th, Shorty woke up early. His burros had wandered off during the night. He went to find them. Like any good prospector, he carried his pick even when looking for animals. You never knew when you might find something valuable. He found the burros grazing on the side of a small mountain. They were about half a mile from camp. About 200 feet from the burros, Shorty noticed a ledge of greenish rock. It had copper stains on it. He walked over and broke off a piece with his pick. What happened next changed everything. Shorty could not believe his own eyes. The chunks of gold were so big that he could see them at arm's length. They looked like jewelry stones. Right then, it seemed to him that the whole mountain was made of gold. He let out a yell that echoed across the desert valley. "Ed, we have got the world by the tail." Ed Cross came running over. The two men stared at the ore in complete disbelief. The rock was green, almost like turquoise. It was spotted with chunks of yellow metal. Shorty said it looked a lot like the back of a frog, but they had to be sure. Was it really gold, or was it fool's gold? Fool's gold is a mineral called pyrite. It had tricked countless hopeful prospectors before. That night, the two men built a roaring fire. They used greasewood branches. They melted the gold out of their rock samples. When the metal ran out and formed a button in the bottom of their pan, their hearts must have nearly stopped. It was real. It was pure, gleaming gold. They named their discovery the bullfrog claim. The name came from the frog-like appearance of the ore. The next day, August 10th, they officially staked their claim and marked the spot. They had no way of knowing they were standing on what would become one of the richest gold strikes the West had ever seen. Shorty and Ed needed to get their ore tested by a professional. They loaded samples onto their burros. They headed 75 miles north to Goldfield. Goldfield was an established mining camp. It had banks. It had assay offices. It had all the services a prospector needed. When their samples were tested, the results were staggering. The ore came back at $700 per ton at minimum. Some samples reached an almost unbelievable $3,000 per ton. In today's money, that would be roughly $105,000 per ton of rock. Word got out immediately. Shorty later described how fast news of a strike travels. You can go into a town after you've made one. You can meet a friend on the street. You can take him into your hotel room and lock the door. Then, after he has taken a drink from your bottle, you can whisper the news very softly in his ear. And within minutes, the whole town would know. What happened next was one of the most remarkable gold rushes in American history. Shorty Harris remembered it years later. He said he had seen many gold rushes in his time that were exciting, but nothing like that stampede. Men were leaving town in a steady stream. They had buckboards, buggies, wagons, and burros. It looked like the whole population of Goldfield was trying to move at once. Timekeepers abandoned their posts. Clerks walked out of stores. Cooks left kitchens with food still on the stoves. Everyone who could move was heading south toward the new strike. Men even hiked the 75 miles pushing wheelbarrows. Shorty remembered that with amazement. The desert road between Goldfield and the new strike became a highway of desperate humanity. Men pulled two-wheeled carts loaded with tools, food, and cooking equipment. Their pots and pans rattled as they trudged through the sand. Others rode horses until the animals collapsed from exhaustion. Some simply walked. They carried everything they owned on their backs under the brutal summer sun. When Shorty and Ed returned to their claim a week later, more than 1,000 men were already camped around it. More were arriving every day. Most slept in the open desert with nothing but a blanket and the stars overhead. By late September 1904, the first town site was laid out. 35 lots sold in 3 weeks. By October, 2 more town sites appeared. One was called Bullfrog. Another was called Rhyolite. The name Rhyolite came from the type of rock that surrounded the gold veins. Rhyolite is a volcanic rock. It is light-colored and rich in silica. It was the perfect name for a town built on volcanic wealth. Competition between the towns was fierce. Rhyolite had one crucial advantage. It sat in a protected basin between mountains. It was shielded from the worst desert winds. This made it the more attractive location. It quickly became the dominant settlement. In January 1905, the Rhyolite town site was officially laid out with 36 blocks. To attract settlers, the developers did something remarkable. They gave lots away for free to anyone who would build on them. People came running. Within 2 weeks, the population exploded from just 2 men to 1,200 people. By June 1905, there were 2,500 residents. They lived in a sea of canvas tents and wooden shacks. By the following year, that number had more than doubled. If you are enjoying this story of one of the craziest boom and bust cycles in American history, hit that subscribe button. I make videos about forgotten stories and forgotten places that changed the world. Trust me, this story gets even wilder from here. Just when it seemed like Rhyolite could not get any richer, it did. In February 1905, a prospector named Bob Montgomery made another stunning discovery. He found gold on a mountain about 1.5 miles from Rhyolite. He had hired a Shoshone Indian guide to help him explore the area. That is how the claim got its name, the Montgomery Shoshone Mine. When Montgomery's ore was tested, the results made the original Bullfrog discovery look almost modest by comparison. His samples came back at an incredible $16,000 per ton. That is the equivalent of more than $560,000 per ton in today's money. Bob Montgomery became an instant millionaire on paper. He boasted that he could take $10,000 a day in ore from the mine. It was the kind of wealth that seemed impossible. It seemed almost imaginary, but it was very real. And it would soon attract attention from some of the most powerful men in America. Charles Schwab was one of the most successful businessmen in American history. He had been the president of Carnegie Steel. He was the first president of the mighty United States Steel Corporation. He would later lead Bethlehem Steel to become a major industrial powerhouse. This was a man who dealt in millions the way ordinary people dealt in pennies. In February 1906, Schwab traveled to Nevada. He wanted to see the Montgomery Shoshone mine for himself. What he saw convinced him to make a massive investment. The negotiation for the mine became legendary. Bob Montgomery was ready to accept Schwab's offer. The offer was $1 million cash plus $500,000 in stock. But Montgomery's wife stepped in. She was not satisfied with those terms. She demanded $2 million, $1 million for her husband and $1 million for herself. Charles Schwab, recognizing the potential of what he was buying, willingly paid the higher price. It was the largest single mining purchase in Nevada history up to that point, and Schwab was just getting started. With Schwab's money and influence behind it, Rhyolite transformed. It went from a rough mining camp into a genuine city. It became one of the most modern communities in the entire American West. Schwab did not just buy a mine. He invested in the entire town. He funded a 100-mile electric power line. The line ran from a hydroelectric plant at the foot of the Sierra Nevada mountains all the way to Rhyolite. He built water pipelines to bring fresh water to the desert settlement. He contracted for railroad spurs to connect the mines to the outside world. By 1907, Rhyolite had electric lights. 400 streetlight poles illuminated the streets at night. This made Rhyolite one of the first towns in Nevada with electric lighting. The town had running water. 3 different water companies competed to serve the town through underground pipes. There was telephone and telegraph service connecting residents to the outside world. 3 different railroads built lines to serve the booming community. The Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad came first, then the Bullfrog Goldfield Railroad, finally the Tonopah and Tidewater Railroad. The town had concrete sidewalks. They were the first in Nevada. Many homes had indoor plumbing. This was a luxury that many eastern cities still did not have in every home. For a town that had not existed 3 years earlier, it was nothing short of miraculous. The structures rising in Rhyolite were unlike anything the mining frontier had ever seen. Instead of the usual wooden shacks and canvas tents, businessmen built substantial buildings. They used cut stone and poured concrete. These were buildings that were meant to last centuries. The John S. Cook and Company Bank was the crown jewel of Rhyolite's architecture. This 3-story building cost over $90,000 to construct. That is equivalent to roughly $3.15 million today. It featured Italian marble staircases imported from across the ocean. It had stained glass windows. It had steam heating. It had time-locked vaults in the basement. The building also housed brokerage offices. Eventually, it housed the post office. The Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad Depot was equally impressive. It was built in the California Mission Revival style. The builders used cut stone hauled all the way from Las Vegas. This elegant station cost an astounding $130,000. That's about $4.5 million in today's money. It was designed to handle the thousands of passengers and tons of freight that moved through Rhyolite every week. The Overbury building rose 3 stories tall. It was constructed of cut rock and concrete. It housed the First National Bank and various professional offices. The building cost around $60,000. That was a fortune for a frontier town. A new schoolhouse was built to educate the hundreds of children. These children had followed their parents to the gold fields. This 2-story concrete structure cost $20,000. It could hold 250 students. It was designed so that everyone could evacuate within 2 minutes in case of fire. Fire was a very real danger in desert towns. Even the jail was built to last. It was constructed of reinforced concrete with 4 steel-lined cells. It included quarters for the jailer and a courtroom for quick trials. At its peak in 1907 and 1908, Rhyolite was home to somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 people. That made it Nevada's 3rd largest city. The exact number is hard to pin down. People were constantly coming and going. They chased rumors of new strikes. They fled when their luck ran out. What we do know is that Rhyolite had everything a person could want in a frontier city, and it had quite a few things they could not get anywhere else. The town had 50 or more saloons where miners could spend their hard-earned wages on whiskey and beer. There were 35 gambling tables for those who wanted to try their luck with cards or dice. 18 grocery stores kept residents supplied with food. 19 lodging houses and hotels provided beds for newcomers and travelers. 16 restaurants served meals at all hours. 8 doctors tended to the sick and injured. 2 dentists pulled aching teeth. 6 barbershops trimmed beards and cut hair. 4 bakeries filled the streets with the smell of fresh bread. 2 undertakers handled the inevitable deaths that came with mining life. There was an opera house where traveling performers staged shows on Saturday nights. A symphony orchestra provided live music. There were tennis courts and swimming pools. Yes, actual swimming pools in the middle of the desert. They were fed by the town's water system. The Rhyolite Mining Stock Exchange opened in March 1907. It had 125 members. The members included brokers from New York, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles. On its first day of trading, 60,000 shares changed hands. By the end of the second week, that number had climbed to 750,000 shares. Money was flowing through Rhyolite like water through a broken dam. Not everyone in Rhyolite was a miner or a merchant. The town attracted all kinds of characters. Some were respectable, some were infamous. Anna B. Moore became Rhyolite's first postmaster when she was just 18 years old. She ran the post office out of a small tent on Golden Street. Her husband, Joe, worked as her assistant. They sorted mail for thousands of eager residents who waited for news from loved ones back home. Two brothers named H.D. and L.D. Porter opened the district's leading general store. They came from a successful merchant family. Their building cost $10,000. It featured electric lights, steam heating, and stock worth $100,000. On opening night, they threw a grand dance that brought the whole town together. A woman called Countess Morajeski opened a business in 1906. Whether she was a real countess or just called herself one, nobody knew for sure. She opened the Alaska Glacier ice cream parlor to the delight of local citizens. In a town where summer temperatures regularly soared above 100 degrees, ice cream was practically a necessity. And then there was Tom Kelly. He was a 76-year-old stonemason. He was born in Australia. He had a creative streak. Looking around at all the empty bottles piling up from Rhyolite's many saloons, Kelly had an idea. He would build himself a house out of bottles. Kelly paid local children 10 cents for every wheelbarrow full of empty bottles they could bring him. Over about 18 months, he collected roughly 50,000 bottles. Most were Adolphus Busch beer bottles. He cemented them together with adobe mud to create a 3-room house. It had a gable roof and a covered porch. The total cost was about $2,500. Most of that went to wood trim and fixtures. It was one of the most unusual homes in America. And unlike most of Rhyolite's buildings, it would still be standing more than a century later. Not everything about Rhyolite was golden. Like all frontier towns, it had a rougher side that respectable citizens tried to ignore. A red light district operated on the east side of town. It was segregated from the main business area, but authorities tolerated it. After the Great San Francisco earthquake of April 1906 destroyed much of that city, some changes happened. Some of the women who had worked in San Francisco made their way to Rhyolite. They were seeking new opportunities in the booming gold camp. Violence was common. The town saw its first killing in October 1905. A dispute in a saloon turned deadly. In May 1906, a miner named Steve O'Brien stabbed his wife with a miner's candlestick. Then he stabbed the judge who arrived to investigate. A deputy sheriff shot and killed O'Brien on the spot. Guns were everywhere. Men with short tempers and long grudges settled their differences in the street. Shorty Harris recalled this years later. He said they had a few gunfights. Several tough characters got their light shot out. He said matter-of-factly that this did not make the rest of them angry. One of the most famous tragedies involved a young woman named Mona Bell. Her real name was Isabel Sadie Peterman. She was born in Nebraska in 1887. She had graduated from high school in Seattle. Somehow she ended up running a dance hall in Rhyolite's red light district. On January 3, 1908, a man named Fred Skinner shot Mona Bell dead. It was a dispute over money. She was only 21 years old. Skinner was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 50 years in prison. He claimed she had shot him first. He said she begged him to finish her off. Few people believed that story. Mona Bell's grave became a local landmark. Visitors still leave offerings at the site today. Remember Shorty Harris, the man who discovered the original bullfrog claim? His story took a tragic turn. It reveals everything about the difference between finding gold and keeping it. After making the discovery that launched 1,000 fortunes, Shorty decided to celebrate. He was, after all, the toast of the territory. Everyone wanted to buy him drinks. Everyone wanted to be his friend. And Shorty loved whiskey almost as much as he loved prospecting. He was happy to accept their hospitality. One night, when Shorty was pretty well drunk, a man named Brian took him back to a hotel room. Brian put him to bed. Brian had thoughtfully left several bottles of whiskey on a chair beside the bed, and he locked the door from the outside. When Shorty woke up, he was thirsty. He helped himself to the whiskey and went back to sleep. This cycle repeated for 6 days straight. Shorty later admitted it was the longest drinking binge he ever went on. When he finally sobered up, Brian showed him a piece of paper. It was a bill of sale for Shorty's half of the bullfrog claim. The price was just $25,000. Shorty remembered getting plenty angry, but it did not do any good. Meanwhile, his partner Ed Cross stayed sober. He kept his wits about him. He sold his half of the same claim for $125,000. Cross returned to California. He married his sweetheart. He bought a ranch near San Diego. He lived comfortably there until his death in 1958. Shorty Harris spent the rest of his life wandering the desert. He was still searching for the next big strike that would finally make him rich. He never found it. He died in 1934 at the age of 78. Everyone who knew him loved him, but he was as poor as the day he was born. His grave marker in Death Valley reads exactly as he requested. Here lies Shorty Harris, a single blanket jackass prospector. When asked why he kept prospecting when he could have retired wealthy, Shorty had a simple answer. Who in the hell wants $10 million? It is the game, man. The game. For those paying attention, warning signs appeared as early as 1906. But in a town drunk on optimism and gold dust, few people wanted to listen. On April 18, 1906, a massive earthquake struck San Francisco. The disaster and its aftermath killed thousands of people. It destroyed much of California's largest city. It also disrupted rail service throughout the region. It diverted investment capital away from Nevada's mining camps. Suddenly, wealthy investors who might have poured money into Rhyolite were sending it to San Francisco instead. Then came the panic of 1907. In October 1907, the Knickerbocker Trust Company in New York City failed. This triggered a massive run on banks across the country. Stock markets plunged, credit dried up. Wealthy Eastern investors who had been funding mining operations in places like Rhyolite suddenly needed their money for more pressing concerns back home. The panic hit Rhyolite hard. Mining required constant investment. You needed money for new equipment. You needed money for deeper tunnels. You needed money for paying workers. When that money stopped flowing, operations began to slow. But the worst news was yet to come. From the beginning, something about Rhyolite's wealth had seemed almost too good to be true. The surface ore was spectacular. You could see chunks of gold without a magnifying glass. But mining is not about what is on the surface, it is about what lies below. As miners dug deeper, a troubling pattern emerged. The incredible high-grade ore that had started the rush was concentrated in narrow veins near the surface. As the tunnels went deeper, the veins grew thinner. The gold was still there, but it was in much lower concentrations. The ore that had tested at thousands of dollars per ton was giving way to ore worth only tens of dollars per ton. This was potentially catastrophic. Low-grade ore can still be profitable, but only if you process enormous quantities of it with expensive machinery, and that required the kind of investment capital that had just dried up in the panic of 1907. In February 1908, something important happened. A group of minority stockholders in the Montgomery-Shoshone Mining Company grew suspicious. They hired an independent British mining engineer. They wanted him to inspect the mine and give them an honest assessment. The engineer's report was devastating. The spectacular high-grade ore that had made the mine famous was confined to only a few narrow bands. These were thin strips of rich rock surrounded by vast quantities of lower-grade material. What Charles Schwab had actually bought for $2 million was not a bonanza mine. It was, as the engineer bluntly put it, a large, low-grade mine. It would never produce the fortunes everyone had expected. When the report became public, panic swept through Rhyolite. Stock in the Montgomery-Shoshone Mining Company had traded as high as $23 per share. It crashed to just 75 cents almost overnight. The boom was over. What happened to Rhyolite over the next few years was like watching a movie played in fast forward. But it was playing in reverse. The trains that had once brought hopeful settlers now carried them away. Families packed their belongings and fled to new opportunities elsewhere. Businesses that had been thriving just months earlier shuttered their doors. The once crowded streets grew emptier with each passing week. By the end of 1908, the population had dropped from its peak of perhaps 10,000 to around 1,000. The Great Fire of August 19, 1908 accelerated the decline. It destroyed the red light district and parts of the Eastern Business District in a single night. In 1909, news reached Rhyolite of a gold discovery at the Pioneer Mine several miles away. It was like watching blood flow from an an open wound. Half of Rhyolite's remaining population left immediately. They were chasing the same dream that had brought them to Rhyolite in the first place. The brand new $20,000 schoolhouse was completed in January 1909. It never filled with students. By the time it opened, most of the families with children had already left. The 1910 census told the grim story in numbers. Rhyolite's population had fallen to just 611 people. That was barely 6% of what it had been 3 years earlier. That same year, all 3 remaining banks closed their doors. There simply was not enough business to keep them open. On March 14, 1911, the directors of the Montgomery-Shoshone Mining Company voted to close the mine. The decision was unavoidable. Despite processing thousands of tons of ore, the mine was operating at a loss. It had grossed approximately $2 million over its lifetime, but it was now $200,000 in debt. Most of that was from the expensive mill Charles Schwab had built. Stock in the company had fallen from $23 per share to just 4 cents. The New York Stock Exchange dropped it from trading entirely. There was nothing left to sell. 2 weeks after the mine closed, the Rhyolite Herald newspaper published its final issue. The editor had nothing left to report except the death of the town itself. The post office hung on until November 1913. By then, there was simply no mail left to deliver. The last train pulled out of Rhyolite Station in July 1914. In 1916, the Nevada-California Power Company made the final pronouncement. They disconnected Rhyolite's electricity. They removed the power lines. The streetlights that had once made Rhyolite glow in the desert darkness went dark forever. A few stubborn souls refused to leave. Hiram Porter was one of the merchant brothers who had built the town's leading general store. He stayed on as postmaster until 1919. He'd invested everything he had in Rhyolite. He could not bring himself to abandon it. By 1920, the census recorded just 14 people still living in what had once been Nevada's 3rd largest city. A 1921 newspaper report mentioned that a woman named Mrs. Dyer was there. She was the proprietor of the Rhyolite Hotel. Her son was with her. They were the only permanent residents. They operated a hotel with no guests. They were waiting for a boom that would never come. When a Los Angeles Times motor tour passed through in 1922, they found only one person still living in Rhyolite. He was a 92-year-old man. His name has been lost to history. He had watched the town rise from nothing. He had seen it become the richest community in the desert. Now he sat alone among the ruins. When he died in 1924, Rhyolite's story as a living town came to an end. Looking back, we can see that Rhyolite's collapse was not caused by any single factor. It was a perfect storm of disasters that hit the town from multiple directions at once. First, the mines were oversold. The spectacular surface ore that started the rush gave everyone wildly unrealistic expectations. Prospectors had false hopes, investors had false hopes, residents had false hopes. When the deeper ore turned out to be low grade, the economic foundation of the town crumbled. Second, the timing was terrible. The San Francisco earthquake of 1906 disrupted rail service. It diverted investment capital at a critical moment. The panic of 1907 then cut off access to the eastern money that mining operations desperately needed. If either disaster had happened a few years later, Rhyolite might have had time to establish a more sustainable economy. Third, the town had no backup plan. Rhyolite existed for one reason and one reason only: gold mining. When the mines failed, there was nothing else to keep people there. The town had no farms, it had no factories, it had no other industries that could sustain a population when the ore ran out. Fourth, everything cost too much. Rhyolite was built in the middle of a desert. It was far from any other major settlement. Water had to be piped in. Lumber had to be hauled from distant forests. Food had to be shipped by rail. Every necessity of life cost more in Rhyolite than it would have in an established community. When times were good, these costs did not matter. When times got hard, They became unbearable. The rise and fall of Rhyolite teaches us something important. It teaches us about boom and bust economics. This lesson remains relevant today. When money flows freely and everyone believes prosperity will last forever, people make decisions that seem reasonable at the time. But they look foolish in hindsight. They build $90,000 bank buildings in towns that have only existed for 3 years. They pay $4,400 for lots that sold for $100 just months earlier. They invest their life savings in mining stocks that trade at $23 one year and 4 cents the next. And when the bust comes, as it always eventually does, those same people lose everything. The businessmen of Rhyolite were not stupid. They were not greedy. They were smart, ambitious people who saw an opportunity and seized it. They built one of the most impressive frontier towns in American history. It had modern conveniences that many eastern cities still did not have, but they built it on a foundation that could not last. And when that foundation crumbled, everything they had built crumbled with it. Today, Rhyolite is one of the most visited ghost towns in the American West. More than a century after the last resident died, thousands of tourists still make the journey. They come to see what remains of the town that was once the richest in the desert. The ruins sit in the Bullfrog Hills of Rhyolite, Nye County, Nevada. They are about 4 miles west of the small town of Beatty. It is close enough to Death Valley National Park that many visitors combine a trip to the park with a stop at the ghost town. Highway 374 runs right past the site. People call it Daylight Pass Road. The Bureau of Land Management now manages the historic area. Admission is free. The site is open from sunrise to sunset every day. There are no gift shops. There are no ticket booths. There are no crowds of costumed actors, just the silent ruins and the endless desert sky. The most photographed building in Rhyolite is probably the most photographed ghost town structure in the entire West. It is the Cookbank Building. Once a 3-story monument to prosperity with its Italian marble stairs and stained glass windows, today only partial walls remain. The thick-walled vault is still there. The bank was completed in January 1908, just as the decline was beginning. It represents both the height of Rhyolite's ambition and the bitter irony of its timing. The Las Vegas and Tonopah Railroad Depot is one of the best preserved buildings on the site. Its California mission-style architecture has survived more than a century of desert weather. After Rhyolite died, the depot served various purposes. It was a casino and bar in the 1930s. It was a museum in later decades. It was a souvenir shop into the 1970s. Today, the Bureau of Land Management is working to restore and preserve it. The Tom Kelly Bottle House stands as one of the most unusual structures in America. It was built from approximately 50,000 beer and liquor bottles held together with adobe mud. Paramount Pictures restored it in 1925 for filming a movie called The Airmail. An on-site caretaker now protects it from vandals and souvenir hunters. The concrete jail is still almost entirely intact. Its 4 steel-lined cells stand empty. You can still see where prisoners once waited for trial in the attached courtroom. Scattered throughout the site are the foundations and partial walls of other buildings. You can see remains of the Porter Brothers store. You can see the Overberry Bank building. You can see the Miners Union Hall. The actual hall building was moved to Beatty. It became the Old Town Hall there. Interpretive signs explain what each ruin once was. Perhaps most haunting of all are the original concrete sidewalks. They still run along some of the streets. They were built in 1907. They were the first concrete sidewalks in Nevada. Now they lead from nowhere to nowhere. They pass buildings that exist only in photographs. Just south of Rhyolite proper, on private property along Highway 374, sits one of the strangest attractions in the desert, the Goldwell Open Air Museum. A Belgian artist named Albert Sukalski founded it in 1984. The museum features a collection of large-scale sculptures. They create a surreal contrast with the ghost town ruins nearby. The most famous piece is called The Last Supper. It is a haunting interpretation of Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting. It is rendered as life-sized ghostly white figures. Sukalski created them by draping plaster-soaked burlap over live models. Then, he allowed the material to harden into permanent form. Other sculptures include Lady Desert, the Venus of Nevada. It is a towering female figure made of cinder blocks. There is Ikara, a hand-carved wooden sculpture of a female Icarus. And there's a 24-foot-tall metal tribute to Shorty Harris. He was the prospector whose discovery started it all. The museum is free to visit. It is open 24 hours a day. It is open 365 days a year. A non-profit organization operates it. They also run an artist-in-residence program. They host cultural events in the on-site Red Barn Art Center. Every year during Nevada Day weekend, something special happens. That is late October or early November. The nearby town of Beatty hosts Beatty Days. The festival began as Rhyolite Days, celebrating the ghost town. The celebration includes guided walking tours of Rhyolite. Bureau of Land Management representatives lead them. There are historical reenactments, there is a parade, there are bed races, there is a chili cook-off, there are classic car shows. It is a chance for people to remember what Rhyolite once was, and to reflect on how quickly fortune can change. Rhyolite's importance to Nevada history cannot be overstated. In the early 1900s, Nevada was in serious trouble. The famous Comstock lode had been exhausted for years. That was the silver deposit that had built Virginia City. It had funded much of the state's early development. The population was declining. The economy was stagnant. Some people in Congress were actually proposing something shocking. They wanted to demote Nevada from a state back to a territory. They thought it no longer seemed capable of supporting itself. The gold discoveries changed everything. Tonopah in 1900. Goldfield in 1902, Rhyolite in 1904. These three mining districts brought new wealth. They brought new people. They brought new hope to a state that desperately needed all three. They pulled Nevada back from the brink. They gave it a second chance. Rhyolite, in particular, captured the American imagination. Here was a city that rose from nothing. It became one of the most modern communities in the West in just 3 years. It had electric lights when most of rural America still used kerosene lamps. It had running water and concrete sidewalks when many eastern towns were still ankle-deep in mud. The fact that it collapsed so quickly and completely only added to its legend. Rhyolite became the ultimate boom and bust story. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of speculation. It showed the fleeting nature of fortune. The story of Rhyolite offers lessons that remain relevant more than a century later. Diversify your economy. Towns, cities, and even entire regions that depend on a single industry are always at risk. When that industry fails, whether it is mining, manufacturing, or anything else, there is nothing to fall back on. The communities that survive economic storms are the ones that have multiple sources of income and employment. Be skeptical of hype. The promoters who sold Rhyolite mining stock coast to coast made fortunes from speculation. Many of their investors lost everything. When something seems too good to be true, whether it is a mining stock, a real estate deal, or anything else, it usually is. Plan for the long term. The businessmen who built Rhyolite's magnificent buildings assumed the town would last for generations. They constructed structures meant to stand for centuries, but they built them on an economic foundation that lasted less than a decade. Long-term thinking about buildings means nothing without long-term thinking about economics. Remember the human cost. Behind every economic boom and bust are real people whose lives are changed forever. Shorty Harris, who discovered the gold that started it all, died poor and alone in the desert. The families who moved to Rhyolite seeking a better life had to pack up and start over somewhere else. The merchants who invested everything in their businesses watched their life savings crumble to dust. If this story taught you something about the dangers of speculation and the importance of building on solid foundations, do me a favor and subscribe. I cover forgotten stories like this one every week. Stories about abandoned places, forgotten vehicles, and the people who built them. Hit that like button too if you want to see more content like this. Perhaps the last word should go to Shorty Harris himself. Despite losing his fortune to a con man, despite spending the rest of his life wandering the desert in search of another big strike that never came, Shorty never seemed bitter about his fate. He loved the prospecting life. He loved the freedom. He loved the adventure. He loved the eternal possibility that the next hill might hold untold riches. When asked why he kept at it when he could have retired wealthy, his answer was simple and profound. Who in the hell wants $10 million? It is the game, man, the game. For Shorty, the search was more important than the finding. The journey mattered more than the destination. The dream of striking it rich was better than actually being rich. Maybe that is the real lesson of Rhyolite. The town was built on a dream, the dream of instant wealth, the dream of striking it rich, the dream of finding fortune in the desert hills. That dream built a city of 10,000 people in 3 years, and when the dream died, the city died with it. But the ruins remain. They stand silent in the desert sun. They are a monument to human ambition and human folly. They remind us that dreams can lift us to incredible heights, and that the fall back to earth can be swift and merciless. Today, if you drive the dusty road from Beatty to Rhyolite, you will pass through some of the emptiest landscape in America. The Bullfrog Hills rise in the distance. Their slopes are dotted with the dark openings of abandoned mine shafts. The sun beats down on the desert floor. It beats down just as it did when Shorty Harris and Ed Cross first made their discovery more than 120 years ago. When you reach the ghost town, you will find the same ruins that visitors have been photographing for decades. The Cook Bank building with its walls slowly crumbling but still standing. The railroad depot with its mission-style architecture, weathered but intact. The bottle house with its walls of amber and green glass glinting in the sunlight. You will walk on the same concrete sidewalks that miners walked on in 1907. Back when Rhyolite was the richest town in the desert, back when the future seemed limitless, you will stand in the doorway of the jail where outlaws once waited for justice. You will read the interpretive signs. You will try to imagine what it must have been like when these streets teemed with 10,000 hopeful souls. And maybe, if you listen carefully, you will hear something in the desert wind, the echo of hammers and saws, the rumble of ore wagons, the laughter from the saloons, the dreams of 1,000 prospectors all mixed together in the dry Nevada air. Rhyolite is gone. The people who built it are gone. The gold they dug from the earth has long since been scattered to the four winds. But the story remains, and stories, unlike gold, never run out.